Welcome, Jeremy and others. Thanks for joining us again. I hope it hasn't been a struggle to join. I'm just going to, as usual, share a few slides, and we'll just dive straight in, given we're a few minutes behind the schedule here. So that hopefully will, yes, here it comes. So last month we...
Do you want to listen on here?
Jeremy, yeah, welcome.
Yep.
Last month we talked through a 3-step framework, which is a bit of a refresh of, or it's a new lens, I guess, on the process we've always been applying. And we're just stepping through that in these first few months of this year. So those steps: sharing the problem, what's the dilemma, sharing the direction, where are we going together, and sharing the actions, how are we going to get there, what steps are we taking. So today we wanted to just dive more into that first step. Next month we'll talk about the second step in a bit more detail. So we know, and those of you who hung around Twyford's for a while, we know the value of sharing the problem, getting that shared sense from all perspectives on what is it we're trying to tackle here. You know, that's something that's really important for any collaborative situation. But it's our experience that the tendency is to focus on the content. And I guess the more we do this work, the more we realize that there's more going on. The bit that's above the water, but we know that the bit that can sink the ship, can sink our collaboration, lies beneath the water. And it's really hard to get a sense of the size of that, its shape, its texture, and just what is going on down there below the water. So what we want to talk about today is how do we explore the hidden parts of our dilemma? How do we surface or uncover the bits that make our projects challenging, but they're not so obvious? An example came to me fairly recently. I was sitting in the office of a client, locally based, but they're setting up and running projects all around the world in developing countries, and they call on experts from their network, from the UK, from the US, from all parts of Australia and further afield, and they're delivering a renewable energy project in Bangladesh. So they've got a lot of on-ground technical people in Bangladesh and other parts of Asia. And we were sitting there talking about some of this, trying to explore what's below the water. And it occurred to them, and it would probably never have occurred to me, but it occurred to the 3 people in the room that they were the only 3 women on the whole project team. And so that it clicked and said, this is what's going on for us, that we're a bit worried about working across these very different cultures from around the world. We're trying to pull together all these, grey-headed technical experts, all blokes, all who know what they're doing. And so while the project, the visible part of the project is about how to deliver this renewable energy project in Bangladesh, a sort of slightly hidden version of that is, how are we going to work together? Because that's a level of complexity that really sits there. And an even more hidden aspect of that, a part that I hadn't seen despite being right there in the room with them, is how do we, as the only women in this group, effectively run this project across these gender lines and very strong cultural differences in how to work across gender lines. So that's, I guess, an example of the sort of thing we're talking about. These are the parts of our dilemmas that make them challenging, and our task is to surface those. One of the ways I'm starting to think about this is there's always a content set of dilemmas, in this case, how to deliver this project, this energy project. But around that, the stuff that really is going on, the stuff we all know, is the social dilemmas, the contextual dilemmas, the stuff that doesn't get mentioned. And we're a bit curious about what's your experience? What sort of issues in your world do you think might lie beneath the water? So feel free to dive in. What's your experience of that?
Well, I've got, for me, these project teams, and there's a BAU teams, the business as usual team, and we're working together. And I wrote up, after talking to you, John, the other day, a few months ago, I wrote up what conversations people were having and what the two sides were saying. So BAU was saying something, and the project team was saying something, and they're both frustrated. And I thought, I got down to it, I thought they're moving at different speeds. BAU are used to a BAU speed, and the project team had definite timelines. They have to have things finished, and people were struggling with that. And it's trying to get both sides to agree about it. But the BAU is saying, this is the way we've always done it, didn't want to change. And the project team is saying, we've still got to finish. We don't care about you. And it was that clash of cultures. It was only when I wrote it up on the whiteboard, people's ideas, suddenly it was like, culturally, we've got a little bit of an issue here. I didn't solve it, but I was more aware that there's a cultural problem. And I've had it on other organizations. It's John, it's just conversations between you and I. I've suddenly realized there is a problem, but I didn't know the solution. But it was nice to kind of identify when people are frustration, usually it's like, BAU, we can't wait for you. We're going to move on.
So different timelines and cultural differences. Yeah, so interesting and not easy to see.
Yeah, well, no. Yes, that's exactly right, isn't it? That I imagine that in the room, everyone's working on the problem, the project, that the tension and the resistance and the difficulty of progress will often come from just those different worldviews on how to run these projects or how to make them work, how to manage them. So that's a good example, Mike, of the sort of thing we're talking about. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, in the work I'm currently doing, we're sweeping up work that other people have been doing for a number of years, taking their raw data and analysing it and reporting on it in different ways. And there's this ownership around the data, even though we're all in the same department and it's not technically owned by an individual, it's owned by the people of New South Wales, but there's that ownership issue that leads to hesitancy to share and see the data used in new ways. Yeah, so that's just an interesting beneath the water issue we're grappling with at the moment.
It's not about the data, but it's about some aspect of the data, in that case, the ownership, the feeling that it's mine. It's not really, but I feel strongly. So why would I let that out? And such hesitancy is obviously going to have an impact on your ability to solve it.
And that might be connected to power. The data is my power, and it's my position and my role in this. If I share the data, then I lose that. It might be about trust. There's all sorts of other elements that are connected to that. That's a really good example. Thanks, Peter. So I think we've all seen these, and I've had quite a bit of response from people, the world out there, saying, yeah, that really resonates. So, we all face this stuff.
So Kelly did make a comment there, is it though the data can be highly contextual and misinterpreted? So absolutely, misinterpretation, people seeing things differently. And if you don't, that's can be another piece that's a little hidden, that, it's not even seen the same way.
Yeah.
Nice, Kelly.
Yeah. So our job as collaborators, as people working with these groups, is to find a way to safely surface some of this stuff. So what's the value in that from your experience? Why is that necessary? Why is that useful? Why is that helpful?
if I take my data example, it's a block without surfacing what's behind the concern. It's potentially a block to what we're being asked to deliver. So working through and getting to the bottom of what's driving that concern will be really important to us to be able to progress. I think we could easily just hit a wall otherwise.
Thanks, Peter. Anything else?
We won't be able to resolve the issue unless we talk about it. Nothing will happen. The underlying problems will always be there then, unless we actually talk about it together.
Yeah, that's right. It's so easy, isn't it, to think we are tackling the problem, which is sort of another way of avoiding the real problem, isn't it? And consequently, if it's not on the table, if we're not even aware consciously that it's there, how can we go about resolving it? Yeah.
So it's interesting, just got a client at the moment, and there's a bit of baggage around particular individual who's now left. And so it's like everything's sweet now because we've fixed up the problem. But every time I engage with any of these people, they spend 3/4 of the time we're together talking about the person who's gone. And it's like, it's still there. And there's sort of like, we fixed it, so we don't need to talk about it, but we keep talking about it. So, but they don't talk about it together. Like, we're not surfacing the impact it had and why that was important and what we need to move on. They just assume that it's okay. So there's that sort of denial that there might still be a problem, and we need, I think exactly as you've said, Mike, we need to talk about it to the extent that we need to move on. So I think it's actually being able to surface and have the conversation about whatever the issues are is an important first step.
And of course, that all begs the question, doesn't it? We know this stuff. In some ways, it's all obvious, and yet pretty much every client, every organisation I walk into, it's not really tackled front on. So why? Why is it challenging, or why is it not? Why are we not diving under the water to see, those more contextual parts of our dilemma? What makes it hard?
Someone might be held accountable. No one wants to talk about accountability, especially if it's lack of delivery. Then someone's frightened of being blamed.
So there's a fear that you might be blamed. Yep.
You're attacking, because if you blame somebody, you're attacking. If you're talking about something, non-delivery of something, someone might take this as a personal affront that say it's the accountant, you're saying I'm not a good accountant, or whatever it is, you're telling me I'm not good.
So a reluctance to talk about things like that because of the consequences or the perceived consequences. Yep.
Yeah, it shifts into the personal, doesn't it? Potentially, or that's the fear.
Potentially.
We're not very comfortable going there, are we? Anything else? Why do we, I get technical project teams in the room, and they're all about the technical, the project, but I'm sort of seeing other stuff going on. So what makes that hard for that group to even be aware of it, or to go there when they are aware of it? What's your experience of that? How do you feel when you see it?
I think sometimes the surface issues are deeper and more complex than they first appear. And when people come together to achieve an objective or deliver something, they tend to be focused on the thing they need to deliver and what they need to deliver it, and not necessarily able or willing to take the time or to open that potential Pandora's box that could in their mind derail where they're heading or what they need to do. So I think sometimes the temptation is to know it's there, but don't address it because it's just going to open up something that we don't have capacity to deal with, or time, or you know.
Yeah, that sounds fairly familiar to me. And there are consequences of that, I guess, aren't there? Implications for the project and for rework and for the speed at which we can all move, I guess.
But I guess that it's the Pandora's box issue. I don't want to open up something that might derail the project. Of course, as Stuart's saying, sometimes the unwillingness to open Pandora's box actually derails the project, because you can't actually make the progress that you wanted to. I mean, a good example for me just recently is somebody said, yeah, everything's going fine, except we had one meeting and about some issue, and a couple of the people came to me after the meeting and said, oh, that'll never work. It's like, well, the unwillingness to derail the conversation by saying out loud, this won't work, and dealing with it, now leads to a situation where that person has to now go and try and sort out with the group, well, why weren't you telling them? And if you did tell them, how they're going to react? It's like there's more rework happening because, why didn't they, is a good question, want to surface their concerns in the meeting. I might upset them and then it'll derail the project. Well, it's probably already derailed the project by not talking about it.
Mm. And don't forget that the last thing out of Pandora's box was hope. So it's always worth opening the box, because that's where the hope comes from. So just sort of moving into, so what can we do about it? These would be some of the, and again, this is fairly straightforward, and yet often not done. It's really, the useful behaviours here are about listening, are about opening up, making a safe space for us to find ways to challenge our own assumptions and our own thinking, check in, how am I feeling and what's my inner narrative, and to get some of that stuff out. And just in the few minutes left, we might just share a story or two of one of the ways we do this. There are many ways, and you've probably got your own ways, and that's fine too. I have found this little tool that we built some years ago, I think comes from other experience from others. So we're not the real creators of this, but the power of these three questions. How do we see ourselves? How do we see them over there, that group, my collaborators? And how do we think they see us? These three questions, I've sort of had groups, as John has, worked around these in all sorts of different places, and I have never seen it not be useful. I don't know, what's your experience of that, John?
Well, I think it's the one about getting unsaid stuff safely on the table is one of the key elements of it. It's actually quite seen as fairly benign. Oh, I could probably answer that question, but then when they make visible to themselves and others, they start to say, oh, why? I wonder why I said that, or wow, I wonder why they think like that. So it prompts that conversation, things like what was surprising, what are the implications of us thinking like that for our relationship, and it can help prompt that conversation that happens at the water cooler or to the boss after, more in the moment. It gets people perhaps a little more used to being able to do that, which provides that healthier environment where you can have the conversation about some of the things that might be tending to derail, rather than keep it hidden. So it gives people a bit of practice and confidence, I find, to it. And oftentimes the roof doesn't fall in, the world doesn't end. When you do this, you go away and it feels a bit better. And people say, I'm feeling a bit better about that group since we've been able to share this. And that then provides a bit of a platform to just keep working around the same thing. Are there some things that you want to say that we don't normally say? So I think it just helps that process.
And it works both ways. In my experience, I'm working down the coast with a road construction team, the government client and the big construction firm doing the building. And we ran this exercise, and then they made it all visible, you know, wrote the inevitable flip charts, got them up on the wall, and just seeing the government reaction to what you, the private sector, we thought you saw us as absolute blockers, you know, pains in the neck. But just reading that, it seems that you can really see that we're doing something important. We're protecting the taxpayer's dollar, you know, we're ensuring quality, and so it was really nice for the government side of that team to see that it wasn't all angst and bad. So their assumptions had all been, these guys don't like us. And of course, that drives the behaviour in the government team to be sensitive, defensive, careful, maybe not open and transparent. But in fact, just seeing some of that stuff up, oh, they don't think we've got a pointed tail and horns. They actually think we're doing something important. That, you know, just that's really important in the dynamic in the relationship. But unless we go there, we can't know that. And I think, in my experience, anyone in these project teams, it's really hard for them to go there. You know, they don't have the tools. We're all fairly under-resourced in being able to go there. So just having...
Sure. You just go back to the previous slide, the iceberg of those useful behaviours.
Sure.
It's just something that just prompted me to think about just recently working with a client, and we were talking about these issues, and he said one of the things he's found from his experience in a consulting firm was the feelings before facts. There was the bit about humanising the conversation, and so they started it with just sort of check-in, you know, how are you feeling, before they got into the facts. But what he found was it actually helped surface some of the stuff about people and how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, and that can help open the conversation. So just another little tool that he found useful to just to keep in mind that feelings before facts. There's humans here as well as the content, and that seems to help have open up that conversation that often surfaces a lot of the relational and contextual issues that we're talking about here.
And the last point there, not fixing, I think it was at Mike, someone said not to fix. And I think that's been a real key learning for me. We're being honest with each other, not with the intention of fixing each other, because that's a life's work, as we know. But it's really important in itself just to surface that stuff, acknowledge it, name it, and add it to or embrace it in the richness of the dilemma. The fact that we do see each other differently, or we are trying to work to different time frames, we've got different worldviews around how these projects run. We don't necessarily need to fix that, but we need to acknowledge that how do we deliver this project in that context? So we don't have to judge, we don't have to give up all those feelings, but it's really useful just to get them on the table. So at least we now have a clearer sense of why we all need to be in the room here, because this is actually, you know, challenging. But challenging is what brings us together. It's why we're collaborating. So I think it's probably just about all we wanted to say at this time. As I say, next month we'll be diving into that second point a little bit, and that next webinar is already up and online, and you can register for that now. I'll just open up any comments, any questions, any observations before we wind up. John and I are happy to stick around, but
I was wondering whether sometimes you've got to accept failure as success, that sometimes you can't resolve things. And no matter if you want to talk about it, other people don't, and you're just going to get a delay. And it's just how things are. And someone coined it a few years ago, failure is success. I was like, perhaps it is. Perhaps some things I just can't resolve, and I've just got to accept it rather than beat myself up over it.
Now, I sometimes wonder if we step away from this thing about success and failure, and we try stuff, we get a result, and if the result is what we want, okay, do more. If it isn't, move somewhere else. And it's just a consequence of what we're trying, rather than good, bad. I think that's a useful way to sometimes, it's a learning opportunity every time. And if the thing doesn't go the way out of it, we should say, okay, what can I learn out of that? I think that's a powerful tool in the toolkit.
Rather than being too negative, you mean, just kind of failure is it's not a good thing to say to people.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a good thing from your perspective, because it's sort of, it's that assumption. What do we assume around failure, rather than just accepting that there's consequences of what we tried, and what are some alternatives that we can try next.
And yeah, sometimes these dynamics tend to weaken, tend to become less powerful if we at least can name them and keep naming them, and just keep asking ourselves about them. We don't, without trying to resolve them, because we're not psychologists. That's not our job. But again, just to keep them on the table is useful. Good.
Anything on your mind, Jimmy?
No, but it's been very useful. Yeah, I think we talked, I can't quite recall it, but there was something around the connotations of the certain words you use, like failure, or just how you phrase stuff that can be in a, I don't know, a negative or a different state, as opposed to looking at things. But Mike's right. I mean, yeah, it's okay to, sometimes you just have to write off stuff and start again, don't you?
I think it's just finding ways to deal with it that actually I guess helps you a little, and perhaps the people you're working with, to actually keep moving on and looking for alternatives, or how we're going to approach this differently, rather than accepting that we failed. I think that it's more that positive, that appreciative inquiry focus on what you're doing. What is it that we've got out of this? What can we learn? Where are we going next? Rather than wailing around in what's wrong. So it's more as, well, okay, that didn't work. Where are we going next?
Yeah.
I think that feelings before facts can be quite a useful way. I've got quite a lot out of that sometimes at the start of meetings, but then again, you don't want to be 4 times a day.
Well, I invariably use a check-in anytime I work with clients, and sometimes it's just a quick number, 7.58 or whatever, and it's just a way of actually acknowledging that people have feelings. They are human. We're not machines. And I think that makes a big step towards acknowledging about the relationship as well as the content. And I think we should do it every time, the start and end, to actually acknowledge we're humans here, and we're going to do some great work in the next half hour, and then we're going to check on us as humans. Invariably, I just go with clients and they jump straight to the content, and it's like we're all machines in the room. There's no acknowledgement that there's people here. And I think that's one of the real big contextual issues. We're all people here, and we react, and we're human. We have feelings, and we'll be frustrated and mad and angry and happy, and that has a huge impact on what we're doing. So I think it's a very valuable tool.
You get brought back to the reality of that when dealing with mana whenua and other sort of groups. Yeah, for sure.
Because that for them, that's just how they work. I mean, if you don't acknowledge that, if you don't tell your story for half an hour first, you're not human. It's like, and they see us Pakeha come in, and we think we know, and we just tell them, and they're going, oh, these guys don't get it.
I had that today with mana whenua. It was we had a meeting. We were getting near to the end of the project, and we're doing lessons learned. And I thought, there's loads of lessons learned. We didn't know what co-design was when you joined us kind of just over a year ago, John. And it was just like, even now we're learning, and it's just like, I didn't know what I said was wrong. And mana whenua as well is like, you can't sit on the sidelines and just criticize us. But it was, we've come a long way since then. But it's, I think next time I encounter it, we'll act differently again. It'll be better. And I was just saying to the team, we've just got to accept that we got things wrong, and we're going to move forward on it, not let's dwell on this.
Nice.
All right. Well, that's good. Thanks for joining, gentlemen, from across the ditch. That's great.
Yep. All right.
Thanks, guys.
See you then. Cheerio.